Okay, I'm trying this for a third time to try to get this recording done. So the way that it worked was I was logged into the wrong section to record the original one yesterday on Zoom. And then when I did record the original one on Zoom, I used my account at City Colleges. And then, of course, you're not able to log into that one, which I didn't really understand how that worked. And so now I'm just going to put this on YouTube and talk about the things that I had been discussing yesterday. So the beginning of the talk that we had yesterday was that we basically went over the syllabus again. And so I think if you want to get any more information on the syllabus, you can go back to that original posting that I had, and then you'll be able to see all of that information. And so the other thing that I wanted to talk about today, and I talked about yesterday, was like the amount of money that the United States government spends and the amount of money that we borrow. And so to do that, I pulled up the United States debt clock. And what I'm going to do is turn the camera so that you can see the debt clock on my laptop. And then, although I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see it, but whatever. And then I'm going to just talk about the numbers that are on there. So I'm going to turn it right now, and then we're going to see the debt clock. And so to go to the debt clock, you could just search debt clock on Google, and you'll see it pop up, and then go to that page. And so basically, when they're talking about the debt clock, they're talking about how much money the United States government owes. And so let me see if I can make sure that this is all in the right spot here. And so right here is the national debt of the United States, and is at $26,662,000,000,000. And according to the way they break this out, that means that each citizen owes $80,000 and each taxpayer owes $214,000, which isn't going to be very easy for us to try to come up with that money to pay that off. And then it also lists like a bunch of other things on here, so I thought I'd go through some of these line items and talk about these. So right here it shows U.S. spending, and it's at $5.5 trillion. So $5,582,000,000,000. And that's higher than we would normally have. Normally our spending would be at around $4.5 or $4.6 trillion, but because of the pandemic, the government has spent a lot more. And so just think of like some of the things that they are spending money on. They're going to be spending money on like giving us the stimulus check, right? So we got like that $1,200 if you're an individual taxpayer, or even for like a family of four, it'd be $1,200 for the two parents each. So that's $2,400 plus $500 for each kid. And so you could have gotten up to like $3,400 if you were a family of four from that stimulus money, which, by the way, they're talking about doing again. So hopefully they're going to do that again, and then we'll get some more money from that. And so when they did that, they didn't have the money to pay for it. So what did they do? They turned around and borrowed it. And so when they borrow it, it all gets added on to that national debt. And so one important thing that I had mentioned, and you guys searched up prior to this, was what is the U.S. Treasury interest rate that they pay. Okay, so we figured out that it was like right now at around 0.7%. And by the way, it's been as low, oh, sorry, that's not what I meant to do. It's been as low as like 0.5%, so 0.5%. And even like, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, it was all the way up around 4.5%. And so the interest rates have dropped significantly. And when those interest rates drop, it also leads to lower interest rates for mortgages. And so like we also saw that when you searched for mortgages, you could get a 30-year mortgage for like 3.1%, right? And I even saw a couple of people who found it for 2.9%. And so imagine like how low that interest rate is for borrowing. But in any case, when we do borrow, we still have to pay interest on it. And so when you're talking about $26 trillion, then the interest starts adding up even at that. And so there's the interest on our debt, and that's per year that we're paying $338 billion. And so fortunately, we're lucky that the interest rate is so low right now, so it's at $338 billion. But in normal times, the U.S. Treasury is going to be paying more like 2% for the 10-year, which of course would make that number go maybe to $500 or $600 billion. And then, by the way, the 10 year is what I sort of talk about, but there's many other different bonds that the U.S. government sells too, like the 30-year or the 2-year. And we're going to talk more about those at a different time. But also just like keep in mind, when you're talking about the government selling bonds, that means that they're borrowing money from you, okay? So it sounds like they're like selling you something, but in actuality, they're just borrowing money from you. And who do they borrow the money from? They borrow it from all sorts of people. They borrow from individuals, they borrow it from companies. Even companies like Goldman Sachs or something has these funds that you can buy treasuries through. They borrow it from foreign governments, and the Federal Reserve also buys our bonds. And so that's a different story for a different day, but they also buy our bonds. And so when you start like looking at all of those numbers, things start adding up, right? Another thing that's interesting here is the amount of spending that the United States does. And these are the top ones right here. We've got Medicare and Medicaid combined is basically 1.3 trillion. Social Security is over 1 trillion, 1.090 trillion. And then defense is at around 700 billion. And then you can see interest on the debt continues to go also. Okay, so this is a test question, by the way. Social Security in itself is the single largest expense that the government has, the federal government has. Of course, Medicare and Medicaid, if you combine them, they are, but you don't combine them, in my opinion. And so Social Security is the largest single expense that the government has. And we'll talk about like Social Security and how Social Security works, and then how we pay for it and all those sort of things in a future discussion also. And so those are some important things to like think about how much money we're spending and where it's going and everything. And so I know like everybody's like, oh, defense is like the most expensive, but it's not the most expensive, but it is the most expensive of the ones that we have to renew each year. And so that one we'll talk about also at a future time. Okay, so if we continue on into some of these other things, we could take a look at federal tax revenue for this year. It's at $2.693 billion. And so the tax revenue is pretty low as of right now. And so if that were to continue on that pace, which by the way, in actuality, our fiscal year ends on September 30th. And so the government's fiscal year goes October 1st to September 30th. And so we don't have much time to make up like this lost tax revenue. But there's also like a lot of things that happened during the pandemic where they postponed the time that you had to pay your taxes and things like that. So there might be a sudden surge. But regardless, also think of all the people who have been out of work who are not paying taxes. And so that's going to lower the tax revenue also. But anyway, if you take a look at the difference here, where we've got federal spending at 5.5 trillion and tax revenue at only 2.6 trillion, then we're going to have a $3 trillion shortfall. But I'm not sure that that's going to end up being that way. And then also at the same time, we don't know what's going to happen with the next stimulus package. Are they going to continue like that $600 a week for those who are unemployed? Are they going to give $1,200 per person per taxpayer? Are they going to give $2,000 per taxpayer? And so we're not sure what's going to happen with that. And by the way, of course, if you want to like just listen to this and pull up this screen on your own, no problem. I totally understand, because I don't know how well it's coming through here or not. And so when you take a look at those, you can, get an idea of what's happening with tax revenue compared to spending. Now, normally I'm all over this. I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to quit spending so much. But it's a pandemic and we don't know what else to do. And so we're going to continue spending. They're going to borrow the money. If somebody else doesn't buy those bonds, then the Federal Reserve is going to buy those bonds. Okay, let's see here. The other important item that's listed here is that gross domestic product, listed at $19.517 trillion. Okay, so gross domestic product is all the goods and services that are produced in the United States. And so when you're thinking about like goods and services, an accountant is a service. Something that's grown on a farm is a good. Something that's manufactured is good. Even somebody who is teaching is a service. And so those things are all combined to equal, in this case, $19.5 trillion gross domestic product. One thing that is a little bit concerning is, and again, it's because of the pandemic more or less, is that our U.S. national debt is around $7 trillion higher than our gross domestic product. And that's oftentimes concerning for an economy. What we can hopefully do is sort of spend our way out of it. So as we're spending more money, hopefully people are going to get jobs and they're going to continue to buy goods and services, and ultimately that will lead to expansion of the gross domestic product and maybe maybe catch up with the debt. And so those are like some things to sort of keep an eye on as far as that goes. Also, if you take a look at some of these other things, they've got like total state revenue, which is at 2.1 trillion. So that's taking all the states combined and how much tax revenue they collect. And think of like how states collect tax revenue. It's through sales tax. It's through, in some cases, property tax, and then income tax, also in Illinois, for instance. So, keep those numbers in mind also. And so the other thing that's just kind of interesting is the 1.1 trillion state debt. And the way that states have debt is by selling bonds too. So like the state of Illinois or the state of Iowa also sell bonds, and then with them selling bonds, we're able to do road projects and things like that. But in addition to that, there's also like a shortfall in pensions. And so like the state of Illinois, they think owes about $120 billion in pensions. So we got a shortfall of $120 billion. But there's still people working in the pensions and still paying into the pensions, and so it hasn't been a problem so far. Okay, I don't want to run on too long with this, and so I just wanted to try to post something about what was going on with national debt, and then we'll catch up next week. And like I said, if you can't make these videos on Wednesdays, no problem. I'm going to record them, and I'm just going to have to move on to that recording that you can do on the JJC website. So I'll work on that this week. Okay, have a good day.